my goodness, I did not. Let me turn off the filters on the camera really quickly. Okay, there we go. Hello. Welcome back to my live stream channel. I'm Sophia, and my live stream is all about rock climbing. Today, I am going to be explaining the climbing grade system. And I also feel like it's important for me to note the disclaimer that I am in no means an expert in any sort of thing relating to climbing. I just have a large passion for it, and I want to share the knowledge that I have with all of you. In my last live stream, I taught you how to tie a personal anchor system and how to tie an 8-knot, and explained some of the general gists of climbing. And it's also, the world of climbing there's always like so many different ways to do things, and so many different ways to explain things. And I know that some of my climbing friends have learned how to do, like, for example, how to tie a personal anchor system in a different way than the way that I was taught by the person who taught me. So it's all very subjective, and so I just wanted to add that disclaimer before we jump into the topic of today's live stream, which is climbing grades. But here we go. So, there are many different rating systems worldwide for climbing grades, but in the United States, we use something called the Yosemite decimal system, which ranges from class 1 to class 5. Class 1 is like pretty much hiking flat, and class 5 is technical rock climbing where a rope is required. The idea of climbing grades is fairly straightforward, but when applied to bouldering, sport climbing, alpine, traditional climbing, or trad, mountaineering, the grades change based on that local climbing area or by the international standard. But typically, climbing grades fall into a rudimentary scale of difficulty. A 5.0 to 5.7 is considered easy. A 5.8 to 5.10 is considered intermediate. A 5.11 to 5.12 is hard. And 5.13 to 5.15 is reserved for a very elite few. Only a handful of climbers have ever, worldwide, have ever climbed a 5.15. And the climbing grades start at 5, but like I mentioned before, the Yosemite decimal system is class 1 through class 5. So class 1 is like hiking flat. Class 2 is a little steeper climb or hike. Class 3 is even more steep. Class 4 is when it gets to the point where like a rope, oftentimes people use ropes for class 4, and then definitely you always use ropes for class 5, except for when you're free soloing, which I will never do in my life because that's scary and you could die. But for the Colorado natives, I'm streaming from Boulder, Colorado. So the 14ers, a lot of the 14ers are ranked class 2. Long's Peak is rated a class 3. And then we'll get back into the class 5s. I also want to mention that in Colorado and Yosemite, climbing routes were established here and in California in like the 50s and the 60s when the hardest grade was up to a 5.8 or 5.9. But if you would, if you are climbing one of those super old established routes, you would probably not think that a 5.8 is an accurate rating for that climb because it's a lot more difficult than a modern 5.8 would be. But many of the climbing grades were established before technical innovations led to the modern climbing equipment like harness, quick draws, rope, more aggressive shoes, like I mentioned in my last live stream, so, that are required to climb harder. So those old climbs established in the 50s and 60s are still rated at the same 5.8, 5.9 on a historical scale to preserve the integrity of the route. And the rate of a climb, as well as the name of the climb, is determined by the first person to put the climb up, which is called the first ascent of the climb. So this obviously means that ratings are very subjective, and you should always take every grade with a grain of salt. And if you're wondering, like, how do you put up a first ascent? In the world of sport climbing, which is climbing with quick draws where there's bolts on the route, and you are putting in your quick draws into the bolts as you go up and clipping your rope in to the quick draws as you go up. The first ascent can either be done by putting in bolts, literally with like a drill and a hammer and your bolts as you are going up the route for the first time. So of course it means that you would be having like a lot of heavy equipment hanging from your harness, like the drill. But yeah, so basically the way that doing the first ascent from the ground up works is that you climb up a little bit, you establish your bolt with your drill into the wall, and then you clip into that bolt that you had just hammered in, and then you climb up a little bit more and do the same thing on the next bolt. But the more common way to do it is actually starting from rappelling from the very top of the climb down and adding bolts as you go down, which is obviously a lot easier if you think about it because you're not like having to climb up with all the equipment on you. You're climbing down and doing the same thing, but you don't have to like be free climbing as you're doing it. You're just rappelling down, adding bolts, and then all the way to the bottom. And then the first ascent of that type of way to bolt it would be like your first climb from the ground up without carrying all your equipment, because the bolts have already been established. So all of the 515 climbs out there were established that way, where like the person started from the top of the route, which obviously would be like a cliff, and then rappelled down, adding the bolts, and then the challenge would be starting the climb from the bottom, making it to the top. And let's see. So another thing is that climbing grades do not take into account the danger factor. They only describe the physical difficulty of the route. So there's actually a danger rating as well on climbs. So it's like that have like movie like grades. So there's like G, PG, PG-13, R, and X. X stands for if you fall, you will die. So I've never seen an X climb in person before, but you can imagine that not that only like daredevils do those ones. And then with an R rated climb, you can also die or severely injure yourself, or break a leg. There are some R-rated climbs, and there's probably some X-rated climbs in Boulder Canyon as well, but I don't know about them personally. And then PG-13 climb is where you can fall and hurt yourself badly. And then a G and a PG is relatively like safe climbs. So, for example, a grade of a 5.8R is like, it's a 5.8, so it's not going to be super, super difficult, but there are sections of the climb that you could fall and really, really hurt yourself or die. And the key to understanding how a route is graded is as much in a route's construct and location as it is its moves. So, for example, the Utah desert is very well known for its particular type of slab and crack climbing. And for the locals that's where they climb, that's what they're used to. A 5.7 would be like considered easy, of course, because a 5.7 is relatively rated as easy. But for someone that's like not familiar with that type of climbing, slab and crack, that 5.7 route would actually feel a lot more difficult for that person. And if you look at this chart here, the USA scale, you can see that starting at 5.10, it breaks into A, B, C, and D. So 5.10s are relatively, like, they're difficult, but they're not anything extreme. And of course, 5.10A is like closer to a 5.9, and then a 5.10D is getting closer to a 5.11A. So 5.10A is easier, and then 5.10B gets a little harder. 5.10C gets even harder. 5.10D, like I said, is closer to 11, so even more difficult. And then it goes, of course, the same for 5.11s, 5.12s, 5.13s, 5.14s, 5.15s. The most difficult climb to have ever been climbed is a 5.15D now, I believe. And it's the way that these have worked is the like getting into 5.15s were created by the person that climbed them, of course, that like rated them. Okay, this is a climb that's harder than a 5.14D, so I'm gonna rate it 5.15A. And same deal with a 5.15B, 5.15C, 5.15D. The 5.15s are like climbs that are mostly all overhung, so even you need to be very strong, because you're basically climbing almost upside down in some cases, and you can imagine like how much strength and power that takes. And then like tiny little handholds, big reaches, jumps to another tiny little handhold that is also overhung. Just very, very, very difficult. And then another important thing about climbing grades is that they are graded based on the hardest move or section of the climb, which is called the crux of the climb. So, for example, let's say a 510D climb could be mostly like 5-8 moves, except for like one section that is like significantly more difficult than the rest of the climb. That would be considered by that person that is climbing it for the first time like a 510D level, and that marks the grade of the climb. So that's another important factor as well. And then I also want to explain the bouldering grades, which I am definitely more of a sport climber, rope climber than a boulderer. So I don't know this stuff quite as well. But basically, the US bouldering scale is ranked V0 through V16. It's known as the Hueco system or the V scale system. V0 is considered easy, and V16 is saved for those elite few crazy strong talented climbers. And like the Yosemite decimal system of the sport climbing routes, it takes into account the difficulty of the holds, the foot placements, and the muscular moves. And from the research that I've done on the bouldering scale, a V0 kind of connotes to a roughly equivalent of a 510 sport climb or below. And then a V4 is around equivalent to like a mid 512 sport climb. So basically, like for the bouldering scale, it gets much more difficult, much more rapidly. V0 is easy, V1 can be challenging. To some, it's still considered easier though, of course. And then V2, V3, same deal, like 511-ish. V4, you're already at 512, like mid 512. So the thing is about my situation is that the hardest climb I've done outside was lead climb was a 511A, and I've been climbing in the gym for like this past winter season because it's not climbing season right now and it's too cold for me to climb. Some people bear it and climb in the winter, but my hands get too cold and I don't enjoy it. So I'm waiting for the warmer weather to start climbing outside again. But I'm climbing like 511s, 512s in the gym now, which are definitely like challenging for me. But generally speaking, gym climbs are rated at usually like an easier grade than outside climbs. So a 511 minus in the gym or a 511A in the gym is usually easier than a 511A outside. So I'm honestly not really sure where what my like max ability outside is right now because I haven't been outside in a while and I haven't put myself to the test. But I'm looking forward to doing that probably pretty soon in the next month, hopefully, when the warmer weather comes and the sun stays for longer. But yeah, that was a bit of a tangent. I know I was mentioning that because I also wanted to mention that, like, for me, bouldering wise, I'm not a very strong boulderer. I would say that, like, V3s are hard for me, for sure. And yeah, the bouldering is often, like, of course, bouldering is lower to the ground. Ropes are not involved. You use crash pads instead, and like have people spotting you as you're climbing. But boulder problems are generally like have more power and big reachy moves to get to the top, and it's a lot shorter, of course. So that is why the bouldering scale gets so much more rapid, because, like, with a V3, you're already doing like 512 crux moves, which are difficult for me right now. And then I also have put up, like, the France, Australia, and UK climbing grade scales in this graph. And you can see the conversion between the US and all the other climbing grades in this chart. Something important to note that I just found out through the research for preparing for this live stream is that in the French system, boulder problems are graded at a very similar notation to the roped climbs, but the difference is that a capital letter after the number indicates a boulder problem, and a lowercase letter, did I say capital number first? Capital letter after the number indicates a boulder problem, and a lowercase letter after the number indicates a roped route. So, for example, an 8 capital C plus is a boulder, and an 8 lower C plus is a roped climb. This chart only has the lowercase ones, but you could easily see that a 7 capital A would be an equivalent to a V2 bouldering scale. Okay, and then I also want to, I'm going to go back to my large camera, show you guys a little bit about how a climbing guidebook works. So this is the Boulder Canyon Climbing Guidebook. It basically has a ton of different climbs that are in Boulder Canyon. And it's organized by crags. So it actually starts from the beginning of the book is the lower end of Boulder Canyon, so closer to the city of Boulder, and then it just goes up the canyon. So the end of the book is the very last climbs before you, like, get to Nederland. And I'm just gonna flip to a crag called Avalon. Let me find it really quickly. Actually, we're just gonna do Cascade Crag. But so Cascade Crag, for example, the book describes where you can park to get to the Cascade Crag, as well as the approach to the crag, which is more often than not you're like hiking up a trail or doing a little rock scramble to reach the crag, which is of course just like a rock wall that has several climbs on it. And then it kind of, there's always a diagram like this of the wall, as well as the all of the climbs that are on this specific wall that are numbered, and then you can find the number, or you can figure out like, okay, so I want to know about climb 2, and then climb 2 is listed here. It's of course numbered in order. This climb is, each climb shows the grade. So this number 2 is called Hustle. It's a 510D. And then a little description of the climb, as well as how many bolts you need. And let's see. And then it's more often than not, guidebooks are color coordinated by the type of climb, so either a sport climb or a trad climb. I haven't really explained exactly what a trad climb is. I've only explained sport climbs because I have never done a trad climb before. I'm only a sport climber right now. But basically, a trad climb is where you are placing gear in cracks and little pockets of the wall as you go up. So instead of bolts, it's like you're using the actual features of the wall to put gear into, and then that gear has a quick draw or a carabiner on the other side of it that you put your rope in. But the thing about trad is, you can imagine like you're not protected by bolts, you're protected by the placement that you, of like how good your placement is with your gear. So it's a lot more mentally straining, because you're like, you have your life in your hands rather than the bolt has your life in there, in the bolt. And the color coordination of this book is like all of the green climbs are called mixed routes, which is when you use, there's bolts and you also use gear as you go up. So you're using bolts, and then there's also areas that you place gear into. The red climbs are sport climbs, so bolts only, and the blue climbs are completely trad climbs, so it's all gear placements as you go up. So of course, when I'm looking through a guidebook like this, my the only ones that I am checking out are the red climbs, because those are the sport climbs that are all bolted. And let's see. What else is important to explain here? Depending on the crag, there's going to be more sport climbs or more trad climbs than others. So if you see here, Bell Buttress is like all blue and green climbs, which means that it's pretty much all trad or mixed routes. And then I was at Cascade Crag earlier showing you. But Cascade is mostly sport climbs, which I will show you when I find the page. Pardon me. Where did you go? Okay. Found it. So you can see like lots of red climbs and some mixed climbs and a few trad climbs, but like mostly red climbs. So mostly sport climbs. Just fun fact, the very first lead climb I ever did was at Cascade Crag. It was number 8 rain check. It was a 5-8. It was really a really special day for me because that climb was it was like at the very beginning of my climbing journey, and I wasn't a very strong climber yet, and it was like honestly really mentally taxing for me and scary because I had never done a lead climb before, and I remember there was a section that I had a hard time getting past for a while, and then I finally got to the top, and it was the best feeling ever because I was like, the part that I was stuck at for a while, I was like, I don't know if I can do this. I'm scared. I'm tired. I'm physically exhausted. But I'm gonna keep trying because I want to see if I can prove to myself that I can do this. And then I did it, and it was a really special experience. And I have not been back to climb it again, but I would absolutely love to see my progress, and see how much my mental game has changed in like my climbing ability and being able to hopefully climb it better. Okay, so I suppose that was all that I had planned today for this live stream. I hope that you guys learned some things about the climbing grades and climbing guidebooks and like also keep in mind that climbing grades are always subjective depending on the person that climbed them. So don't beat yourself up if you can't climb something that's rated a grade that you feel like you should be able to climb, and then also don't get like too cocky, I suppose, about climbing a grade that be proud of yourself for sure, absolutely, but if you climb something that's a harder grade that was actually easy for you, then maybe there's something a little bit, I don't know, never mind, I guess. Be proud of yourself. Okay, well, thank you all for watching, and I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your Tuesday. Goodbye.